Hey everyone, here's another video about the great Cozy Cole. And I had a request to talk about some more of the ideas that he would use in his solos. And he had a huge solo vocabulary, lots of different ideas that he would use. So these are just some of my favorites, some that have stuck out to me. I wanted to start, in the previous video I had mentioned this pattern between the bass drum and his hands that he would play a lot. This thing. And again, you'll hear him play that a lot. He was very innovative in the way that he would incorporate the bass drum into his solos. A lot of things that became very standard for guys to play later on. I think that he was really the first to do it. And that one that I had demonstrated before, he had some variations on that he would play. In addition to playing it between the bass drum and his hands with one hand on the snare drum and one hand on the tom-tom, he would play the same thing but with one hand on the cymbal instead of the tom-tom. So he would play it like this. He'd do that a lot. He would also play it with the bass drum and one stick on the other. So those are some different ways he would play that same idea. Also, speaking of that one stick on the other and putting the bass drum in between, different guys would have ways that they would do that. It just made me think, Gene Krupa, one of his most favorite licks that he plays throughout his career is this. You'll hear him play that all the time. In 1938 at the Benny Goodman Carnegie Hall concert, he plays it on Don't Be That Way. There's a 1967 live version of him playing Big Noise from Winnetka. It's faster, but he played that throughout his career. It's very identified with him. And he would also play that same thing, same pattern, but between the bass drum and the cymbal. Instead of one stick on the other, he would play. That's how Gene Krupa would kind of do that sort of thing. Cliff Lehman would kind of do it like this. But Cozy Cole would play it. So those are some variations that he would have on that pattern. Other ways that he would incorporate the bass drum, which for the time were definitely rare, he would just play things like, or those are some different ways he would put the bass drum in. He would also reinforce various accents that he was playing with his hands with the bass drum. So again, if you took something, let's say he and Gene Krupa, and other guys too would maybe play, let's say Gene Krupa would play something like this. The bass drum in 4 the whole time. Cozy Cole would play a similar thing, but instead of having the bass drum in 4, he'd accent the bass drum with his hands. So whereas Krupa would play, Cozy Cole would play. So that's a kind of thing that he would do, reinforcing the hands with the bass drum. And again, not a lot of guys were doing that in that sort of way. He was also an incredible rudimental drummer, and he would do different things. Some of the things that he would play with single strokes, he liked to play single strokes and move one hand around, usually move the right hand around. So that could be going from the snare drum to the toms. He would play things like that, or same kind of thing, but maybe with his hand starting on the toms and moving to the snare drum. He would play those sorts of things. He would also mix up, play single strokes and mix 8th notes and 16th notes together, like this. might play that on the snare drum, or he might play that same thing, but move his right hand. He would also play single stroke triplets with accents on the cymbals hand to hand. He would play this a lot. So those are some things that he would do with single strokes, and he also would do a lot with paradiddles. He would play different combinations of single and double paradiddles, this kind of thing. And then again, he would sometimes reinforce those accents with the bass drum. Sort of like that kind of thing. He would also play one rhythm and move that rhythm around to the different drums. Just things like he really was great at taking one idea and just really exploring it. He wasn't afraid to stay with one thing and just really milk it and get the most out of it. A lot of these things in someone else's solo, this could just be 2 bars in a solo that they would fly by, but each one of these things, he was just great at pacing and developing a solo. He could just take one of these ideas and just groove with it for a while before moving on to something else. And the first time I can really remember hearing Cozy Cole was on a recording with Louis Armstrong and the All-Stars. And many great drummers played in that band, and the first one, of course, is Sid Catlett. Cozy Cole was the next main drummer with the All-Stars after Sid Catlett, and those are, of course, pretty big shoes to fill. I mean, how do you replace Sid Catlett? You can't. But the first time I heard Cozy Cole was playing Stompin' at the Savoy with Louis Armstrong, and that sort of became the main drum feature in the All-Stars, starting with Cozy Cole. Well, there's my cat, Stumpy. I don't know if you can hear that. Hey, Stumpy, how you doing? Anyway, Sid Catlett with Louis, usually for his drum feature, he would either play a blues called Steak Face, or he would play a Coleman Hawkins tune called Mop Mop. And then starting with Cozy Cole, Stompin' at the Savoy became the main drum feature for the All-Stars, and later drummers like Barrett Deems and Danny Barcelona, they would also use Stompin' at the Savoy as their drum feature, even though they would occasionally play other tunes as well, and so would Cozy Cole. But he really made Stompin' at the Savoy the drum feature for the All-Stars, and he had a really cool solo that he would play on there, where he would play a time solo, and he'd start out just playing on the cymbal, so his solo would start out something like, for a while, then you'd come off the cymbal, go to the drums, play some of the ideas that I was talking about before, go back to the cymbal, just groove a little more, come back to the drums for a little longer, back to the cymbal, keep going back and forth, just a great kind of development and tension and release, and then eventually he'd come off the cymbal for the last time and really just stay on the drums and build it up, you know, this big crescendo, and it's just a great framework for a solo, and that kind of idea of, you know, playing time but kind of playing figures against it as part of your solo. Again, that's a thing that later on you'll hear Max Roach do a lot, Philly Joe Jones, who actually studied with Cozy Cole. But the first time I really became aware of that was with Cozy Cole, and it's a great solo. I mean, I've heard him play different versions of it with the All-Stars where it uses that same kind of framework, but it's always great. And then he would end the solo usually with something, with a figure that I really identify with Cozy Cole, and also with Gene Krupa, something that's probably familiar, this quarter note triplet thing. And that's just sort of the thing. You'll hear different guys do it. Sid Catlett would do it too, although he would usually do it in a kind of understated way. I mean, just, and then the band would come back in loud, which I always thought was cool. But Barrett Deems would usually end his solos with the All-Stars like that. But I really think of it as a Cozy Cole and Gene Krupa thing. I don't know who really came up with it or if it was even one of them, but I know they were friends and they even had a drum school together in New York in the 50s. And they both like to play that lick to end their solos. And if you see the movie The Glenn Miller Story, Cozy Cole and Gene Krupa are both in that movie. And Gene Krupa plays for a bit on Cozy Cole's drums, and then they trade, and then they end up doing this great drum duet, which they end by playing that quarter note triplet figure together. It's very cool. And Ben Pollack is also in that movie, so it's a good one to check out. In fact, the first time, 30 years ago when I was first getting into this stuff, that was the first time I was able to see footage of Gene Krupa actually playing in The Glenn Miller Story. I had heard him on the soundtrack for the Gene Krupa story and on recordings, but the first time I saw him was in The Glenn Miller Story, so that was obviously very cool. And Cozy Cole also made a big impression on me there. And just to say again that Cozy Cole was a very early matched grip player. He was playing a lot of this stuff matched grip, which again is a very, very innovative thing. So those are some things that Cozy Cole would do in his solos that I think were pretty cool. Again, to recommend some recordings, the stuff with Louis Armstrong's All-Stars, I would highly recommend. He's also on some of the Eddie Condon Town Hall broadcasts. He sounds great on there. And then 2 recordings of his from the 50s that I like a lot. And as you may have noticed, I tend to particularly love the way these guys were playing in the 50s. I mean, I love everything they did from their first recordings to their last. But I feel they just kept getting better. And you know, George Wettling, Nick Fatul, all these guys in the 50s, I really feel they were playing at the top of their game. And Cozy Cole is on a recording by Coleman Hawkins called Standards and War Horses. That's really good. And also one with Henry Red Allen, which I think was originally released. It was called Ride Red Ride, and then it was re-released as World on a String. But that's another one where you get to hear Cozy Cole do a lot of nice stuff. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you again for all the nice comments, and hopefully I'm going to get to Cliff Lehman next. And let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see, and I will be back soon. Thanks a lot.